share. Today, I'd like to present a very special hypothesis that I have developed after an intense study of official history. Let's consider this situation primarily hypothetical, given that some controversial topics will be touched upon. However, let's explore the history I can construct based on the numerous clues I have gathered for my theory. To start, we must acknowledge the existence of an advanced civilization in the Netherlands that developed here long before it was known as Netherlands. I propose that these were two groups, the Frisians and the Phoenicians. These two groups, I argue, held global dominance until the year 1600. Both had colonies in the Mediterranean, Africa, and Asia, maintaining strong trade relationships and organizing themselves, operating from the Netherlands. Over the past few centuries, concerted efforts have been made to undermine this once global hegemony and civilization. It was the counts and priests of the Dutch, originating from the Holy Roman and Byzantine empires, who ultimately shattered this global dominance. It became the conspiracy of the Batavians. Our world has a tumultuous history, both in terms of human history and geological history. Both are explosive, both also exhibit patterns of repetition. Periodically, it seems as though our civilization is completely destroyed or erased. When I look at pictures from our past, the farther back I go, the less credible the story behind it becomes. This isn't a conspiracy, but rather a result of realistic contemplation and conclusion. For instance, in America, we see extraordinary and similar architecture reminiscent of what we see in Europe and across the world. The so-called Greco-Roman architectural style from the 18th or 19th century, or the earlier Gothic styles. Globally, we observe advanced architectures that are at least several hundred years old. These are relatively recent building structures and architectures. As we delve further into the past, the locations where we find these highly advanced foundational structures become increasingly improbable: high altitudes, great depths, impossible locations. Our world is built upon the foundations of a lost civilization, a civilization that was thriving just a few hundred years ago. So, what happened, and why can't we remember or acknowledge it? I believe I found an answer to this after an intense study of history and encountering some very special and significant quotes. These quotes, in my opinion, paint a very different yet coherent picture of our real history. The Phoenicians are one of the most fascinating and mysterious ancient civilizations. They were masters of the sea, trade pioneers, creators of the alphabet, and founders of many colonies in the Mediterranean. They profoundly influenced the history and culture of many other peoples, such as the Greeks, Romans, Carthaginians, and Hebrews. But who are the Phoenicians truly, and where did they originate? The traditional view posits that the Phoenicians were a Semitic-speaking people originating from the Levant, the region encompassing present-day Lebanon, Syria, Israel, and Palestine. They were believed to have settled there around the 3rd millennium BC, evolving from the Canaanite civilization. Setting themselves apart from their neighbors, they engaged in maritime activities that connected them with distant lands and cultures. Their name was thought to be derived from the Greek word phoenix, meaning purple, referencing the dye they produced from the murex snail. However, this view is contested by several alternative theories that shed a different light on the origin and identity of the Phoenicians. One such theory is the Frisian-Phoenician hypothesis, suggesting that the Phoenicians were related to the ancient Frisians, a Germanic people inhabiting the coastal regions of the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. This hypothesis draws from the controversial Oera Linda book, claiming to be an ancient chronicle of Frisian history dating back to 2194 BC. According to this book, the Frisians were the original inhabitants of a significant part of Europe and the Middle East, playing a crucial role in civilization's development. It proposes that the Frisians were also the ancestors of the Phoenicians, referred to as Phoenicia, aiding them in establishing their trade empire. Additionally, the book suggests that West Friesland and Friesland were locations or settlements of ancient Phoenicia, with the Phoenicians being the original inhabitants of Malaysia. In this thesis, I aim to re-examine this hypothesis, presenting a new interpretation of the Phoenicians' origin and identity. I contend that the Phoenicians did not originate from the Levant but from a different region I term Cadhim. Cadhim would have been an area spanning from the Netherlands to England, acting as the hub of ancient world trade. It would have been a collaboration rooted in Frisian origins, with the Frisians being the seafaring people and the Cadhimers, or the Phoenicians. This hegemony would have gradually eroded due to emerging powers such as the Dutch or the Roman Catholics, eventually usurped by the VOC, Dutch East India Company. To substantiate this hypothesis, I'll present several arguments drawing from various sources such as language, history, archaeology, mythology, and genetics. I aim to demonstrate more similarities between the Frisians and the Phoenicians than commonly assumed and provide more evidence for a Cadhemic origin of the Phoenicians rather than a Levantine one. Language. One of the primary sources for studying the Phoenicians is their language, belonging to the Semitic language family. Phoenician language is notably documented in inscriptions found on stones, metals, clay, ivory, and papyrus. The Phoenician language also forms the basis for the Phoenician alphabet, consisting of 22 consonants and serving as the precursor to the Greek and Latin alphabets. The traditional perspective suggests that the Phoenician language was a dialect of Canaanite, the language spoken by the Levant's inhabitants. It's believed that the Phoenician language evolved from Proto-Canaanite, dating back to the 2nd millennium BC. This language allegedly spread through trade and colonization, leading to various variants like Punic, the Phoenician dialect spoken in Carthage and North Africa. However, the Frisian-Phoenician hypothesis challenges this view, asserting that the Phoenician language was not a mere Canaanite dialect but a distinct language related to Old Frisian, the language spoken by ancient Frisians. This hypothesis, derived from the Oera Linda book, suggests that the Phoenician language and alphabet originated from Old Frisian script, comprising 26 letters and predating the Phoenician script. To support this hypothesis, I've employed various methods including comparative linguistics, historical linguistics, etymology, and phonetics. Multiple sources like the Oera Linda book, Phoenician inscriptions, Greek and Latin texts, ancient national history, and modern Frisian and Semitic languages have been utilized. The implications of the hypothesis. In this chapter, I aim to discuss the potential implications of my hypothesis concerning the origin and identity of the Phoenicians, which I term the Frisian-Phoenician hypothesis. I intend to argue that this hypothesis sheds new light on the ancient world and European culture, while also presenting several questions and challenges for further investigation. The ancient world. One implication of my hypothesis is that it offers a different perspective on the ancient world compared to the traditional view rooted in Greek-Roman civilization. According to my hypothesis, the Phoenicians were not a Semitic people from the Levant but rather a related maritime group originating from an area stretching from the Netherlands to England. They were the initial founders of most Greek cities and exerted significant influence on the history and culture of various other peoples, including the Carthaginians, Hebrews, Etruscans, and Celts. Moreover, they were either ancestors or kin of several renowned figures from mythology and literature, such as Hercules, Cadmus, Dido, Pygmalion, and Hannibal. Therefore, according to my hypothesis, the ancient world wasn't solely a Greco-Roman realm but rather a Frisian-Phoenician world characterized by diversity and dynamism. It was a realm of trade and navigation, discovery and exchange, amalgamation and conflicts, innovation, and creativity. The ancient world was a stage where the Frisians and the Phoenicians played leading roles, imprinting their mark on civilization. European culture. Another implication of my hypothesis is that it suggests a different origin and identity for European culture compared to the traditional views based on Greco-Roman heritage. As per my hypothesis, the Frisians and the Phoenicians were the carriers and disseminators of an ancient European culture dating back to the 2nd or 3rd millennium BC. They laid the groundwork for European language, script, religion, art, science, and politics. They also established connections between Europe and the rest of the world, enriching European culture with influences from other civilizations like Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Indian, and Chinese. Thus, my hypothesis posits that European culture isn't solely a Greco-Roman culture but rather a Frisian-Phoenician culture marked by significant continuity and diversity. European culture embodies a legacy of maritime trade, discovery and exchange, amalgamation and conflicts, innovation, and creativity. It's a culture where the Frisians and the Phoenicians held a central position, leaving indelible imprints on the cultural landscape. Questions and challenges. A final implication of my hypothesis is that it raises several questions and challenges for further inquiry. It's a highly controversial and unconventional hypothesis, contradicting established beliefs and available evidence. It draws from various sources such as the Oera Linda book, Phoenician inscriptions, Greek and Latin texts, and modern Frisian and Semitic languages. However, these sources alone are insufficient to prove or disprove my hypothesis. Extensive research is necessary to test and refine my hypothesis and explore potential alternative explanations. One question arising from my hypothesis is how the Frisians and the Phoenicians interacted and shaped their collaboration. When and why did they commence their trade and colonization activities? How did they expand and maintain their network? Additionally, how did they develop and disseminate their language, script, religion, art, science, and politics? How did they adapt to diverse environments and cultures they encountered? Furthermore, how did they define and alter their identity and relationships? Another question arising from my hypothesis is how the Frisians and the Phoenicians dealt with emerging powers such as the Dutch or the Roman Catholics. How did they lose their dominance and transfer their legacy? When and how did they conflict with these powers, and what were the consequences? Moreover, how did they preserve and transmit their culture and knowledge, and how did they adapt or modify them? Lastly, how did they leave their mark on the history and culture of Europe and the world? Answering these questions is intricate and demands a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach utilizing various methods and sources such as linguistics, history, archaeology, mythology, and genetics. It also requires a critical and creative mindset willing to challenge existing views and offer new perspectives. Finally, it necessitates an open and respectful dialogue accommodating diverse viewpoints and interests, aiming for enhanced understanding and appreciation. This unique hypothesis is certainly grounded in something tangible. I draw this conclusion after encountering several profoundly revealing quotes in our national history. Take, for instance, this quote from 1756. Erasmus states that the Dutch originated from the High Germanic peoples, from Japheth, the son of Noah. Our language, Dutch, is the oldest in the world, next to the Hebrews. The Germans claim their descent from Twisgon, coming from the earth, Skoon, born clean. The Germanic lands, at a certain point, divided themselves between Italy and Gaul. This quote alone encapsulates two of my favorite topics, the lost history of the once great Frisian dominion and, in addition, the lost knowledge of humanity's true origins. The initial mothers of the human race were, quite literally, born like a plant. A telling quote supporting this notion comes from one of Thoth's emerald tablets, the Atlantean. Do not think that man was born from the earth, although he comes from it. Man's spirit can be light-born, yet without knowledge, he can never be free. There are numerous other indications pointing toward this particular manner of birth for humans. It's a process that alchemists have sought to replicate for thousands of years. A process that was entirely dressed up by religion, which was created and or modified by the alchemists in the Middle Ages. This took the form of concepts such as the Holy Virgin, Maiden, the person and life of Jesus Christ, the alchemical vessel also known as the Athena, and even the origin of the word autochthonous in official history. Autochthonous means of the earth, and so were the earliest Greek kings of peoples like the Athenians or Spartans, the so-called autochthons. However, this needs to be interpreted and comprehended literally. This is where we witness history transitioning into mythology. This primarily occurs because we, in present times, no longer comprehend the magical scenes performed in ancient times. Such rituals seem purely like magic and fabrications to us modern people. For instance, the written history derived from the Romans is taken very seriously, positioning this history as unchangeable truth. However, the further back we delve into this history, the more we classify it as mythology. A particularly intriguing quote from history that I've discovered, illustrating this concept, is the following. The Greeks know and acknowledge that they did not invent their script. They attribute its introduction to Cadmus, a Phoenician. The names of their oldest letters from Alpha to Tau correspond so entirely with the names of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet, to which the Phoenician script must have been closely related, that there can hardly be any doubt about the Phoenician origin of those names. However, the shapes of their letters differ so entirely from those in the Phoenician and Hebrew script that there's no consideration of kinship in this respect. So, where did the Greeks receive these letter forms from? A quote from another history book offers us a clue. The English of ancient times, the trading Phoenicians, appropriated the script symbols for dealings with Egypt. They borrowed, as Brooke asserts, from the ancient Egyptian script system, adopting the simple strokes as seen in book script, which is a kind of abbreviation of the symbols on the monuments, in the Egyptian papyrus scrolls, and practically applied them to express their own language in writing. This resulted in a world event because the Phoenician symbols became the common link that brought several peoples together and led to an unforeseen movement in the lives of the ancient civilizations. Certainly, here's a rewritten version. A possible West European origin, indeed. However, this quote from 1602 is quite revealing. The inhabitants of Crete once had a king named Jupiter, who subdued the pirates, and his son, Minos, defeated the Athenians in a sea battle, forcing them into an annual tribute. The Phoenicians were the first to engage in trade in Greece and brought with them the love of money, the root of all evil. The Phoenicians then sailed to Greece with their ships and, seeking retribution for the harm done to Ione, the daughter of Inachus, the Cretans later abducted Europa, the daughter of Agenor from Phoenicia. Because Jupiter, the king of Crete, aware of the Phoenicians' deceit in abducting Inachus' daughter, sailed with his ship, the prow of which resembled an ox, to Phoenicia and captured Europa, previously mentioned, by force. From this, the fable originated that Jupiter transformed into an ox or bull, carrying Europa on his back across the sea. The Argonauts, renowned Greek explorers, led by Jason, constructed an extraordinarily large ship named Argo, Greek for fast, near Mount Pelion. With this ship, Jason sailed to Colchis, retrieved the Golden Fleece, and married the daughter of King Aetes, called Medea. Following the sea voyage of the Argonauts, we have the Greeks' naval journey to Troy, where they, having arrived with a fleet of well over 1,000 ships, destroyed it after a 10-year siege. From this arose the lengthy journeys of Aeneas and Odysseus. The famous mythologies stemming from these events, known to us all, are, in essence, testimonies of real occurrences. With this, I aim to demonstrate that written history, as penned many hundred years ago in the Netherlands, portrays a radically different image compared to the truths upheld in today's mainstream historical writings. Furthermore, these quotes suggest that Dutch might indeed be one of the oldest languages in the world, a notion I also find supported in my studies. Old Dutch is literally found everywhere in the world. Consequently, there's a substantial amount of English or international history hidden within these Old Dutch texts. For instance, a quote from 1649 states, "A defense for those who had control over the laws of the Dutch West Frisia and some neighboring lands before the change that took place in 1618. Wikipedia states, "The year 1618 was significant in European history. It marked the onset of the 30 Years' War, a large-scale conflict that would devastate much of Europe. The war commenced with the Second Defenestration of Prague, an event where 2 Catholic councillors of Emperor Ferdinand II were thrown out of the window of Prague Castle by a group of Protestant nobles. This event led to a rebellion of the Protestant estates of Bohemia against the emperor. The war swiftly spread across the Holy Roman Empire and attracted other European powers. The Protestant coalition was led by Sweden and France, while the Catholic coalition was led by Spain and Austria. The war lasted until 1648 and resulted in the loss of millions of lives. The conflict had a significant impact on European history, particularly on the development of Protestantism and the Holy Roman Empire. The reason I'm creating this video in English is to extend my availability to English colleagues in research and to highlight that I am willing to translate ancient texts that you provide, free of charge. I've observed numerous instances where YouTube researchers, for example, misunderstand the meanings of certain texts simply because they cannot comprehend the evident Dutch aspect, which indicates that a crucial element in history is deliberately excluded. The true knowledge about the nature of the so-called ancient world, an ancient world governed in the form of a Frisian hegemony. A fascinating clue in one of the most ancient histories we know is the origin of the word Athene in ancient Greece, which also refers to one of the main gods from ancient Egypt. Pallas gives the new city its name, Athenae, which has no meaning in Greek. Minerva bestows the fort she founded the name Athene, which has a meaning in Frisian and indicates they arrived there as friends Athen. Just like all other civilizations, the initial rulers of this civilization were gods or were considered as such. For instance, in the Egyptian civilization, Akhenaten was one of the key changes in their pantheon. Aten or Aten is the Egyptian sun god. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. For instance, the entire biblical history can be placed within a Dutch or Netherlandish context or origin, as well as the most ancient history we know from ancient Mesopotamia. More on this in an upcoming report, complete with all the intriguing quotes and clues. I've immensely enjoyed dissecting these medieval texts and will certainly continue to do so. Provide me with interesting material, and together, we will unveil the secrets these texts offer. Email me at chrisfolgersmusic@gmail.com for more information.